The faint hum of broken machinery crackled through the smoky remains of the crashed ship. Lieutenant Eva Carter pushed against the heavy steel beam, pinning her leg. Her breath ragged from the effort. Pain lanced through her body, but she gritted her teeth, refusing to succumb to the despair threatening to engulf her. The wreckage of the horizon was scattered across the alien jungle, pieces of twisted metal and shattered glass gleaming faintly under the planet's twin moons. Eva had no time to waste. The air here was breathable but heavy, tinged with an unfamiliar metallic scent that made her head swim. She tore free a piece of her uniform to bind the gash on her leg, her eyes scanning the area for supplies. The emergency beacon was useless. The rescue wouldn't come. She was alone on this hostile planet. At least, she thought she was. A deep, guttural growl rumbled through the jungle, sending shivers down her spine. The trees, towering and gnarled with glowing purple veins, rustled as something large moved among them. Eva froze, clutching a jagged shard of metal as her only weapon. The growling grew louder, closer. Whatever it was hunting her. A shadow emerged from the jungle, and Eva's breath hitched. It wasn't the beast she expected. It was worse. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, with sinewy, silver-scaled skin, was a Zurrican warrior. His piercing black eyes scanned her, his expression unreadable. A long blade hung at his side, and even in his wounded state, his arm was bleeding heavily, his stance uneven. He looked like he could kill her in a heartbeat. Eva raised her makeshift weapon, her hands shaking. "Stay back." The alien's lips curled into a snarl. "Pathetic. You won't survive long on this planet alone, human." "I'll take my chances," she snapped, tightening her grip. The Zurrican took a step forward, his gaze cold and calculating. "You've crashed on a hunting ground, little soldier. There are beasts here that will tear you apart before the sun rises." Eva's heart pounded. She wanted to call his bluff, but the distant roar of something monstrous reminded her she didn't have the luxury of bravado. "Why are you here?" she demanded. "Your people won the battle. Shouldn't you be celebrating?" "I was left behind," he admitted, his voice tinged with bitterness. "Dishonor. The Zyrkan way." Eva hesitated, confused. An enemy left behind to die. It didn't make sense, but she didn't trust him enough to ask more. The Zyrkan warrior took another step closer, his predatory gaze never leaving her. "You have 2 choices," he said. "Join me, and we survive this together. Or stay alone, and die before the next sunrise." Eva hesitated, the weight of his words pressing on her chest. The jungle's noises seemed to grow louder, more threatening, as if the planet itself were urging her to decide. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth, "but try anything, and I'll kill you." The Zyrkan let out a low chuckle. "You can try, human." Thus began their uneasy alliance in the heart of an alien world. The jungle was alive with sound. Strange calls from unseen creatures, the rustle of alien foliage, and the distant, ominous growls of predators. Eva kept her grip tight on the makeshift weapon, her muscles tense as she followed the Zyrkan warrior through the dense undergrowth. His movements were fluid despite his injuries, and he seemed to blend into the environment, his silver-scaled body reflecting the faint light of the glowing plants around them. Eva wasn't sure if she could trust him. The Zyrkans had brought humanity to the brink of extinction in the war, and here she was, relying on one for survival. Still, he seemed to know more about this planet than she did, and her instincts told her she couldn't last long on her own. "What do I call you?" Eva asked, breaking the silence. The Zyrkan glanced back, his sharp black eyes narrowing. "Threx," he said simply. "Threx," she repeated, testing the unfamiliar name on her tongue. "You said this is a hunting ground. What's out there?" "Death," he replied without hesitation. "Beasts the size of your human machines. Silent killers that move in the dark. And worse." Eva swallowed hard but forced herself to stay composed. "You're very comforting." Threx didn't respond, his focus returning to the jungle ahead. They moved deeper into the wilderness, the alien flora casting eerie, shifting shadows. Eva noticed Threx occasionally touch the trees or sniff the air, as if sensing dangers she couldn't see. He moved with purpose, and for the first time since the crash, she felt a sliver of hope. After what felt like hours, they stopped at a small clearing near a shallow stream. Threx knelt, inspecting the area before nodding. "We rest here," he said, his tone brooking no argument. Eva set down her makeshift weapon but kept it within reach. Her body ached from exhaustion, but she wasn't about to let her guard down completely. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice low. Threx paused, his gaze fixed on the stream. "Helping you? No, I am helping myself. Alone, my injuries will kill me, or the predators will. With you, there is a chance. Small, but a chance." Eva frowned. His honesty was almost refreshing, though it did little to ease her unease. "And what happens when we get out of here?" "That depends on you, human," Threx said, turning to face her. His imposing figure loomed over her, but his expression was unreadable. "If you betray me, you die. If you stay by my side, I will ensure you survive." Eva met his gaze, defiant despite the fear twisting in her stomach. "And if I decide I don't need you?" Threx smirked, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "Then I will enjoy watching the jungle devour you." The tension between them was palpable, but Eva knew she had little choice. Survival required compromise, even if it meant working with someone she had every reason to hate. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Eva shivered despite the humidity, and Threx noticed. "The nights here are deadly cold," he said. "You will freeze alone." Eva hesitated, glaring at him. "Let me guess. Sleep beside me or die. Right?" Threx's smirk returned, and he gestured to the ground beside him. "You're learning, human." Reluctantly, Eva sat down close enough to share his body heat. The cold bit at her skin, but the Zircon's warmth kept her alive. For now, survival came first. Trust, or anything like it, would have to wait. The alien jungle transformed under the shroud of night. The faint glow of bioluminescent plants painted the surroundings in shades of eerie green and blue, but the beauty of it was lost on Eva. The chilling cold seeped into her bones, sharp and unforgiving. She rubbed her arms, her teeth chattering despite her best efforts to suppress the sound. Threx, sitting a short distance away, didn't seem affected. His silver-scaled body radiated a subtle warmth, the kind that promised survival in these brutal conditions. His piercing black eyes were trained on the darkness, scanning for threats with a calm that unnerved her. Eva couldn't stop herself from asking, "Why aren't you freezing like I am?" Without turning, Threx replied, "My species evolved for extremes. Your fragile body did not." His tone was as sharp as the knife he kept by his side. Eva scowled. "Thanks for the reminder." A sudden roar echoed through the jungle, loud and guttural, shaking the ground beneath them. Eva's heart skipped a beat, and her hands instinctively gripped the jagged metal shard she had taken from the wreckage. Threx didn't flinch. "It's not close enough to worry about. Yet." "That's comforting," Eva muttered under her breath, inching closer to his side despite herself. She hated how vulnerable she felt, and more than that, she hated that her best chance of survival relied on him. Threx finally turned to her, his gaze steady. "You'll die if you don't stop shivering. Human bodies can't survive this cold." Eva shot him a glare, her pride prickling. "I'll manage." Threx leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "You humans are stubborn. I'll give you that. But your pride will kill you before the beasts do. I told you already. Sleep beside me or die. Your choice." The logic was undeniable, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. After a long, tense moment, Eva gave a reluctant nod. She shifted closer until she was within arm's reach. The heat from Threx's body was immediate, a welcome relief against the biting cold. He didn't look at her as he muttered, "Closer." Eva groaned, her frustration clear, but she obeyed. She settled beside him, her back against his side, her muscles tense. The warmth spread through her body, and despite the awkwardness, her shivering stopped. For the first time since the crash, she felt her body relax, exhaustion pulling at her eyelids. "You're quiet for a soldier," Threx said after a moment, his tone surprisingly neutral. "I don't have much to say to the enemy," Eva replied, her voice laced with defiance. Threx let out a low chuckle. "Enemy. Here, we are both prey. Remember that." His word hung in the air, a bitter truth neither of them could ignore. As sleep began to claim her, Eva realized she had no choice but to trust him for now. The jungle was merciless, and the cold unforgiving. Whatever dangers awaited them, they would face them together or die alone. The jungle was quiet in the early hours of the morning. The moonlight bathed the dense forest in a pale glow, casting long shadows on the ground. Eva woke to the sound of Threx standing up, his large form silhouetted against the faint light. He didn't make a sound as he moved, his senses honed from years of survival. "Get up." Threx's voice was low, urgent. Eva groggily opened her eyes, her body still heavy with sleep. "What is it now?" she mumbled, but she quickly sat up when she saw the tension in his posture. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring into the darkness ahead. His black eyes narrowed in concentration. A rumble shook the ground, followed by the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the jungle, crashing through trees and underbrush. Eva's heart skipped a beat, and she instinctively reached for her weapon, even though it was little more than a sharp piece of metal. "What is that?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. Threx's voice was steady, but his expression hardened. "A behemoth, one of the many creatures on this planet that hunts with silence and speed. You cannot outrun it. You cannot fight it alone." The sound of the creature's movements grew louder, closer. It was coming straight for them. Eva could hear the sound of massive claws scraping against the jungle floor, each step a reminder that survival here didn't come easy. Threx turned to her, his eyes locking with hers. "Stay close to me. Do exactly as I say. No hesitation." Eva nodded, her heart racing. She didn't have time to ask questions or second guess. She had learned quickly that hesitation here meant death. Without another word, Threx darted into the shadows, and Eva followed, her breath quick and shallow as she tried to keep up with his pace. They moved through the jungle with practiced precision, weaving between trees and over rocks. Threx's large frame seemed to blend into the surroundings, his body moving as fluidly as the creatures of the jungle. Eva struggled to match his speed, but she pushed herself, knowing she couldn't afford to fall behind. The beast was close now. Eva could feel the vibrations in the ground as it moved closer, its massive body shaking the earth with each step. Threx stopped suddenly, holding up a hand to signal Eva to halt. They crouched behind a thick, vine-covered tree, the sound of the beast's heavy breathing echoing through the jungle. Eva's pulse pounded in her ears, and her mind raced. She couldn't see the creature, but she could hear it, feel it closing in. Threx whispered, "When it passes, we move quickly. We cannot engage it directly. Trust me, human." Eva clenched her jaw. "You think I'm scared of a damn beast?" Threx didn't respond. Instead, his gaze fixed on the darkness ahead, waiting for the right moment. The behemoth moved into view, its hulking mass barely visible in the shadows. It was monstrous, easily 10 feet tall, its thick hide covered in jagged spines and scales that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. It passed by them without noticing. Eva held her breath, her muscles tight with tension. She could see the behemoth's glowing eyes, its movements slow and deliberate, scanning the jungle for prey. Once it was gone, Threx moved swiftly, signaling Eva to follow. They stayed low, moving fast, but quietly through the jungle, the behemoth's roars fading into the distance. "You did well," Threx said as they slowed their pace, the danger passing for now. Eva let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was too close. Threx looked at her, his face unreadable. In this jungle, close is often as good as dead. She met his gaze, nodding. She had learned more in these past few hours than in all her years of military training. Here, survival wasn't just about strength or weapons. It was about quick thinking and trust. Trust she was beginning to place in Threx, whether she liked it or not. The dense jungle had been unnervingly quiet after the encounter with the behemoth. For hours, Eva and Threx moved in silence, alert to every rustle and distant growl. The jungle had swallowed them up again, its towering trees and twisting vines making it feel as though they were in an entirely different world. Threx led the way, his movements confident as always, while Eva followed closely behind, her eyes scanning their surroundings. As they pushed forward, Threx suddenly stopped, raising a hand to signal her to be quiet. Eva froze, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't hear anything, but she knew Threx's senses were sharper than hers. She watched as he knelt down, brushing aside some thick foliage to reveal a dark, jagged opening in the ground. A cave entrance. Eva's eyes widened in surprise. "Is this safe?" she whispered. Threx didn't answer right away. He crouched, examining the entrance carefully, then looked back at her. "Safer than being out here. This is an old path, forgotten by most. But there are things in these caves, things that are better left undisturbed." Eva didn't like the sound of that, but she knew better than to argue. With no other choice, she followed Threx into the darkness, her heartbeat quickening as the air grew cooler and heavier with each step. The opening was narrow, forcing them to move slowly at first. Eva could barely make out her surroundings, the faint glow from the jungle outside offering little illumination. As they moved deeper, Threx seemed more at ease. His eyes adjusted to the darkness quickly, while Eva fumbled to keep up, her senses on high alert. The passage began to widen, and the air smelled damp and ancient. Strange carvings lined the walls, alien symbols that Eva couldn't recognize. "What is all this?" Eva asked, running a hand along the surface of the wall. The carvings seemed to pulse with some unseen energy, but there was nothing familiar about them. Threx's voice echoed in the stillness of the cave. This was built by an ancient species. They called themselves the Lorin. Long before the Zircons, long before humanity. No one knows exactly what happened to them. Some say they were destroyed by a force far greater than their own. Eva stopped in her tracks, turning to face him. "A greater force? What do you mean?" Threx didn't look at her. He was watching the shadows, his expression dark. "There are many forces in the galaxy, human. Some of them are older than your species, older than mine. Some have power beyond comprehension." Eva shivered, though she wasn't sure if it was from the cool air or the weight of his words. She wanted to ask more, but she could tell Threx wasn't in the mood to share. He led her deeper into the caverns, and the path began to narrow again, forcing them to move in single file. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to hum with energy. It was subtle at first, but soon it became impossible to ignore. There was something alive in this place, something ancient and powerful. Eva could feel it in her bones, a strange pull that made her uneasy. Finally, they came to a wide open chamber. It was enormous, the ceiling lost in shadow. In the center of the room stood a massive stone structure, covered in more alien markings. At first glance, it seemed like a simple monument, but as Eva looked closer, she saw strange symbols glowing faintly along its surface, as if alive. "What is this?" Eva asked again, her voice barely a whisper. Threx stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the structure. "A weapon," he said. "A weapon capable of destroying entire fleets. It was built by the Lorin to protect themselves from something they feared. But the Zircons, they didn't know what they were getting into when they started searching for it." Eva's mind raced as she processed his words. A weapon. This old structure could hold the key to everything. The war, the Zircons, humanity's survival. "And you want me to help you find it?" Threx turned to her, his eyes shadowed. "I don't want you to help me. But if we don't find it before the Zircons do, we might not survive long enough to make it off this planet. Eva felt the weight of his words settle over her. Whatever lay ahead, it was far bigger than her and Threx. The fate of more than just their lives rested on what they found in this dark, forgotten place. The ancient cavern felt like a tomb, the air thick with mystery and the weight of time. Eva stood beside Threx, her eyes scanning the enormous stone structure before them, her mind racing. The glowing symbols on its surface pulsed in time with her heartbeat, an eerie reminder of how much she didn't understand. Threx stood motionless, his gaze locked on the ancient monument. It was clear that this place held deep significance for him. "This is the weapon the Loren created?" Eva asked, her voice barely a whisper as if speaking too loudly would disturb the silence of the cavern. Threx nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Yes, it was their last defense against an enemy they couldn't fight with weapons alone. The Loren called it Zalof. It was meant to be a shield, a way to protect their people from something far older and far more dangerous than any of us. Eva's curiosity burned, but she hesitated. What was it that the Loren feared so much? Threx's black eyes flicked to her for a moment before he turned back to the stone structure, a force from beyond the known galaxy. The Xaloth wasn't just a weapon of destruction. It was a key. It had the power to unlock something, a force of unimaginable destruction. A chill ran down Eva's spine, something that could destroy entire fleets. Threx's voice was quieter now, his tone heavy with an emotion Eva couldn't place, something that could destroy entire worlds. The air in the cavern seemed to thicken, pressing in on her from all sides. Eva felt a growing sense of unease. She had always thought of the Zircons as the greatest threat to humanity. But this was something far beyond their reach. The implications were terrifying. "How do you know all of this?" Eva asked, her voice cracking slightly. "You don't exactly look like someone who spent a lot of time studying ancient alien civilizations." Threx gave her a hard look, and for a moment she thought he might snap at her. But instead, he sighed and walked closer to the stone monument. His massive hand reached out, gently brushing the glowing symbols on the surface. The moment he touched them, the ground beneath them trembled, and a low hum filled the air. "I've been searching for answers for a long time," Threx said quietly. "I was cast out by the Zircon High Command because I questioned their motives. I didn't want to be part of their endless conquest, their endless war. So I came here. I found this place, and I learned what the Zircons have been looking for." Eva took a step closer, the weight of his words sinking in. "You mean they've known about this weapon all along?" Threx nodded. "Yes, the Zircons have been hunting for it. They think they can control it, use it to win the war, but they don't understand. They don't know what they're dealing with. If they unlock the full power of this place, it will destroy them, and everyone else with it." Eva's mind reeled. The Zircons, with all their advanced technology, thought they could harness this power, but they were blind to the true danger. That was a mistake they couldn't afford to make. "So, what now?" Eva asked, her voice shaking slightly as she tried to steady her thoughts. "What do we do?" Threx's eyes darkened. "We stop them. We can't let the Zircons control the Xaloth. We can't let them release whatever is locked inside." Eva stared at the monument, her heart pounding. She could see the danger now, clear as day. If the Zircons unlocked this power, there would be no stopping it. But how could they possibly stop an entire alien empire from taking control of something like this? The weight of the decision pressed heavily on her chest. She wasn't just fighting for her own survival anymore. She was fighting for humanity, for every species that could be wiped out by the Xaloth's power. "There has to be another way," she muttered, half to herself. Threx's gaze locked onto her, and she saw something in his eyes, something almost human. "There is no other way. We either stop them now, or we all die." Eva nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. She didn't know what they were about to face, but she was beginning to realize that this was bigger than anything she had imagined. If they failed here, it wouldn't just be her and Threx fighting for their lives. It would be the fate of entire galaxies hanging in the balance. "We need a plan," she said, her voice more determined than before. Threx nodded. "I know where we can find the Zircons, but it won't be easy. They'll be looking for us, and they won't stop until they have the tell-off." Eva glanced back at the glowing symbols, a fire igniting within her. She had no intention of letting the Zircons win. Not now. Not when the stakes were this high. Together, they would stop them. The jungle had grown even more hostile as the hours passed. The distant roars of predators and the oppressive humidity seemed to close in on Eva and Threx, but they kept moving. Threx was focused, his expression grim as he led the way, his every step calculated. Eva followed closely behind, her mind racing with everything they had learned in the past few days. The Zircons were coming for the tell-off, and if they found it first, the war would become the least of their problems. Eva's eyes flicked nervously between the jungle and Threx. She had grown to trust him more than she ever thought possible. He had saved her life more times than she cared to admit, and yet she still couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something from her. His dark past, the reasons the Zircons had cast him out, there were still so many unanswered questions. "I thought you said we were close," Eva said, her voice edged with impatience. They had been walking for hours now, and the dense jungle seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. Threx glanced over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing. "Patience, we're almost there." Eva didn't like the way he said it. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she didn't know where there was. Threx hadn't given her any details about their destination. She had no idea if they were heading toward a hidden Zircon base or something far worse. Suddenly, a crackle echoed through the jungle. The hair on the back of Eva's neck stood on end. Threx froze, his entire body going rigid. "Zircons," he muttered under his breath, barely audible. "They found us." Eva's pulse quickened. She reached for her weapon, a useless piece of metal that had saved her life only because the enemy had underestimated it. Threx turned to face her, his expression cold and calculating. "Listen to me, human," he said, his voice low. "Stay behind me and do exactly as I say. Do not engage them unless I tell you. Understand?" Eva nodded, but her gut churned. She didn't like the way Threx was acting. His usual arrogance, his indifference to danger. It was all gone. He was nervous, and that made her nervous. They heard the Zircons before they saw them. The unmistakable hiss of their language filled the air, the harsh syllables cutting through the silence like a knife. Threx's eyes darted from side to side, and Eva could see his mind working, calculating, planning. "They've set a trap," Threx whispered. "We walk into the clearing, and they'll spring it." Eva's stomach twisted with fear, but she couldn't show it. "What do we do?" Threx's expression hardened. "We turn the tables." He signaled for her to follow and slipped off the path, disappearing into the thick foliage. Eva hesitated for a moment, then followed him. They moved through the jungle like shadows, careful not to make a sound. They reached a ridge overlooking a small clearing, where a group of Zircons was waiting, their weapons drawn. Threx's hand shot out, grabbing Eva's wrist. "Wait for my signal," he whispered, his voice sharp. Eva watched as Threx moved silently, like a predator stalking its prey. Her heart pounded in her chest, her eyes never leaving the Zircons below. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Just as the first Zircon turned toward the ridge, Threx sprang into action. He launched himself from the shadows, his massive body crashing into one of the soldiers, sending him sprawling to the ground. Eva froze, unsure whether to join the fight or stay hidden. Then something unexpected happened. A figure stepped forward from the trees, emerging from the shadows. Eva's eyes widened in shock as she recognized the figure. It was one of the Zircon officers, the same one who had been part of the mission that had attacked her ship. Threx didn't seem surprised. In fact, There was a strange calmness in his eyes as he faced the officer. "You betrayed me," Threx said, his voice a low growl. The officer's lips curled into a sneer. "You should have known, Threx. You think you can escape the Zircons. We always find those who defy us." Eva felt a chill crawl up her spine. Betrayal. Threx had led them straight into a trap. "I should have known," Threx muttered, more to himself than anyone else. I thought I could outrun them." The officer raised his weapon, aiming it directly at Eva. Threx stepped forward, his body blocking her from view. His eyes locked onto the officer, but there was no fear in them, only resignation. "You've made your choice, Threx," the officer said, his voice dripping with malice. "And now you'll die for it." Eva's mind raced. They were trapped. There was no way out. But then something shifted in Threx's expression. It wasn't fear. It wasn't defeat. It was determination. "Not today," Threx said, his voice cold as ice. In one fluid motion, he drew his blade and lunged. The clearing was suddenly alive with movement, chaos unfolding in the blink of an eye. Eva's heart raced as Threx lunged at the Zircon officer, his blade gleaming under the pale moonlight. The officer barely had time to react before Threx's sword collided with his armor, sparks flying from the impact. The force of the blow sent the officer stumbling backward, but he quickly regained his footing, snarling in rage. Eva stood frozen for a moment, watching as Threx fought with a fierce intensity she hadn't seen in him before. His movements were precise, like a predator hunting its prey. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something more. And in that moment, Eva realized that it wasn't just the Zircons that Threx was running from. It was something deeper. The shame of his past, the betrayal of his people. It was all tied into this fight. The other Zircons in the clearing quickly reacted, drawing their weapons and closing in on them. Eva snapped out of her daze, her instincts kicking in. She couldn't just stand there. She had to help, even if it meant risking her life. Without thinking, she grabbed the jagged metal shard she had been carrying and threw it at the nearest Zircon soldier. It struck him in the arm, but he barely flinched. The soldier turned to face her, his eyes filled with murderous intent. "You'll regret that, human," he hissed. Eva didn't wait to find out what he meant. She dove behind a nearby tree, narrowly avoiding a blast from his weapon. The air sizzled with energy, and the heat from the blast made her skin burn. Her mind raced. She had to do something, anything, to help Threx. But the Zircons were too many, and Threx was still locked in a deadly duel with their officer. The sound of clashing blades and grunts of effort filled the air as Threx fought to keep his opponent at bay. Eva's eyes darted around the clearing, looking for any advantage she could use. She spotted a large rock formation to the side of the clearing. If she could reach it, maybe she could get a better shot at the Zircons. Without thinking, she sprinted toward the rock, weaving through trees and avoiding gunfire. Every step felt like an eternity, and her lungs burned with exertion. She could hear the Zircons closing in behind her, but she couldn't afford to look back. Just as she reached the rock formation, a loud shout rang through the clearing. Threx had taken the officer down. The Zircon lay on the ground, his blade shattered. But the fight wasn't over yet. The remaining soldiers were closing in on Threx, their weapons raised. "Threx!" Eva yelled, her voice full of desperation. Threx turned just in time to see Eva, perched behind a rock. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, he seemed to understand what she was planning. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward her, his long legs eating up the distance between them. The Zircons didn't miss the movement. They opened fire, their energy blasts cutting through the air with deadly precision. Threx shoved Eva to the ground, just as a shot grazed his shoulder. He grimaced, but his expression remained determined. Eva rolled to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. "We need to end this," Threx said through gritted teeth, his hand still clutching his bleeding shoulder. Eva nodded, her mind racing. She didn't have much to work with, but she had one advantage: their overconfidence. The Zircons thought they had already won. With a burst of adrenaline, Eva grabbed a large rock and hurled it at the remaining soldiers, distracting them long enough for Threx to charge. He moved like lightning, knocking the first Zircon soldier to the ground with a brutal strike. Eva joined him, using the sharp metal shard to take out another soldier who was getting too close. The remaining Zircons hesitated for a split second, unsure of whether to engage or retreat. That hesitation was all Threx needed. He moved in quickly, taking down one soldier with a swift strike to the neck, and then another with a powerful sweep of his blade. The battle was chaotic, but in the end, it was over. The last Zircon soldier lay on the ground, defeated, his weapon tossed aside. Eva stood panting, covered in dirt and blood, her chest heaving as she tried to calm her breath. Threx was breathing heavily too, but he looked more alive than he had since they first met. The battle had awakened something in him, something primal, something that had been buried deep inside for a long time. "We did it," Eva said, her voice shaky but filled with relief. Threx glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "For now," he replied, his voice low. "But they'll be back, and next time, they won't underestimate us." Eva nodded, her hand still gripping the metal shard tightly. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over, and with every step they took, the stakes would only get higher. But for the first time, Eva felt like they might actually stand a chance. The silence after the battle was suffocating. The once thriving jungle had fallen quiet, the air thick with the aftermath of conflict. Eva wiped the blood from her face, her hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline still pumping through her veins. She glanced around the clearing, taking in the bodies of the fallen Zircons, and then her eyes landed on Threx. He was standing a few feet away, his massive form still tense, his gaze scanning the area, as if expecting another ambush. His silver scales gleamed under the pale moonlight, and despite the bloodstains on his armor, he looked every bit the warrior he was. But there was something different about him now, something that hadn't been there before. Eva stepped toward him, her boots crunching softly on the broken earth. "We did it," she said, her voice surprisingly steady considering the chaos that had just unfolded. Threx didn't respond right away. He simply looked at her, his dark eyes narrowing as if weighing something important. "For now, yes," he said quietly. "But the Zircons will not stop. They will come again, and next time, they won't make the same mistake." Eva nodded, understanding the truth of his words. They were still a long way from being safe. The Zircons were relentless, and their resources were nearly endless. But for the first time since her crash, Eva felt like she had a real chance at surviving. And not just surviving, but winning. "You're right," she agreed. "But we got a weapon they don't have." Threx raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. "What weapon is that?" "You," Eva said simply. "You're the reason we're still alive. You know how they think, how they fight. You've already outsmarted them once." For the briefest moment, Eva thought she saw something flicker in Threx's eyes, something like pride, maybe even a hint of gratitude. But it was gone before she could be sure. "They will come again, human," Threx said, his voice low and steady. "And when they do, we need a plan, a real one." Eva was silent for a moment, her gaze drifting to the ancient stone monument in the center of the clearing. They had learned so much in the past few days, but there was still so much they didn't know. They still didn't fully understand the power of the Taloth, and if the Zircons found it before they did, everything they had fought for would be lost. "We need to go back to the caverns," Eva said, her mind already racing with possibilities. "There's something there. We didn't even scratch the surface." Threx looked at her, his eyes calculating. "The Taloth is not something to be taken lightly. It is a force that even my people do not fully understand. We must tread carefully." Eva stepped closer, her expression serious. "I'm not saying we use it, but we need to understand it. If the Zircons get to it first, it will be a weapon they won't hesitate to use. We need to know how to stop them." Threx didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned away from her, looking back toward the jungle, his gaze distant. Eva could see the conflict in him, the same conflict he had carried since the day the Zircons had betrayed him. He didn't trust easily, and why should he? His people had cast him out. And now, here he was, standing side by side with the very species they had sought to destroy. "You think I'm going to help you again?" Threx said after a long pause, his voice heavy with something Eva couldn't quite place. Eva's gaze softened. "I think you want to. More than you realize." Threx turned to face her, his expression unreadable. There was a long moment of silence between them, the weight of their shared history hanging in the air. Eva wasn't sure what he saw when he looked at her, but for the first time, she didn't feel like an enemy to him. She wasn't just the human soldier from the other side of the war. She was an ally, someone who had fought beside him, someone who understood the stakes. Finally, Threx gave a single curt nod. "We go to the caverns. But know this, if you betray me, I will not hesitate to end you." Eva met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not here to betray anyone." Threx's lips twisted into something like a smile, but it was gone just as quickly. "Then let's get moving." They gathered what little equipment they had, and with no more words between them, they set off into the jungle once more. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger at every turn, but Eva knew one thing for sure. For the first time since the crash, she wasn't alone in this fight. Together, they would face whatever came next. The journey back to the underground caverns felt different now. The jungle seemed less hostile, and even the air felt easier to breathe. Eva kept pace with Threx, her thoughts swirling. The fight was far from over, and they both knew it. But with each step they took, the bond between them grew stronger, forged in the fires of battle and survival. The ancient caverns loomed ahead, their entrance hidden among the thick vines and jagged rocks. The air grew colder as they approached, a sharp contrast to the humid jungle. Eva shivered, though she wasn't sure if it was from the cold or the weight of what lay ahead. Inside the caverns was the Taloth, a weapon of unimaginable power, capable of destroying entire worlds. They had to understand it, or the Zircons would use it to destroy everything in their path. Threx stepped forward, his massive frame casting a long shadow in the dim light. "Once we enter, there is no turning back," he said, his voice steady, but tinged with something deeper, something she couldn't quite place. Eva nodded. "I know. We do this together. No one else." Threx didn't respond, but his gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than usual. Then he turned, stepping into the dark entrance of the caverns. Eva followed, her heart pounding in her chest. They moved cautiously through the narrow passageways, the air growing thicker with each step. The walls seemed to pulse, as if the very stone of the caverns was alive, responding to their presence. They reached the main chamber, where the ancient monument stood, its towering presence almost overwhelming. The symbols on its surface glowed faintly, still alive with energy after all these years. Eva approached cautiously, her fingers brushing the stone. The hum of power beneath her touch was undeniable. This place was more than just a relic. It was a key to something far greater. "We need to unlock its secrets," Eva said, her voice barely above a whisper. Threx moved beside her, his eyes scanning the symbols. "I don't know if we can," he admitted. "The Loren kept their knowledge hidden for a reason. This is not a weapon for mortals." Eva studied the symbols, trying to make sense of them. She had learned a lot in the past days, but this was unlike anything she had encountered before. The symbols seemed to shift before her eyes, each one more complex than the last. She reached out, tracing the lines with her fingers, and as she did, a soft glow began to emanate from the stone. Threx stepped back, his expression unreadable. "You're unlocking it." "I don't know if I am," Eva said, "but I have to try." The stone beneath her fingertips began to vibrate, the energy growing stronger. The hum filled the cavern, growing louder and louder until it seemed to fill the very air. Eva stepped back, feeling the power surge through her. The symbols on the stone shifted rapidly now, rearranging themselves into a pattern she could almost understand. Suddenly, the ground trembled and the stone structure began to shift. The air around them crackled with energy as a low guttural voice echoed through the cavern. An ancient voice, long forgotten. "Who dares to awaken the Xaloth?" The voice boomed. Eva's heart raced as she turned to Threx, her breath coming in shallow gasps. This was it. They had awakened something far older and far more dangerous than they could have imagined. The Xaloth was no longer just a weapon. It was a force that could change everything. Threx's eyes hardened, his grip tightening on his weapon. "We don't control this power," he said. "We never did." Eva looked at him, her mind racing. "Then we destroy it, before the Zircons can get their hands on it." Threx hesitated, his gaze never leaving the pulsing monument. "Destroy it?" he repeated. "We may not have a choice." The voice boomed again, this time with more force. "Foolish ones, you cannot destroy what you have awakened." Eva stepped forward, her voice trembling but determined. "We will find a way. We can't let this power fall into the wrong hands. Not the Zircons, not anyone." For a moment, the voice seemed to pause, as if considering her words. Then the energy in the cavern shifted, the stones settling into silence. Eva could feel the presence of the Xaloth deep within her mind, like a weight pressing against her consciousness. Threx turned to her, his expression grave. "You are right. But we must act quickly. The Zircons are already on their way." Eva nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we fight. We take the fight to them. Together." Threx's eyes softened, just for a moment. "Together," he echoed. They turned toward the entrance of the cavern, knowing that what awaited them outside would be their greatest challenge yet. But now, with the power of the Xaloth and their bond stronger than ever, Eva and Threx were ready. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun.